Welcome to the Elevating Security Orchestration with CACAO briefing. CACAO is an acronym for Collaborative Automated Course of Action Operations for Cybersecurity. Thank you for joining us today. The webinar is being recorded. You can submit your questions at any point during our briefing today. We will try and take questions at the end, but rest assured that if we do not get to your questions, we will follow up separately. We will also be sending all attendees a follow-up email with a link to the recorded version and information on participation afterwards. And with that, I would like to turn it over to our first presenters.
Hello, my name is Brett Jordan. I'll be one of the presenters on today's webinar. I have worked in cybersecurity for 25 years, most of that on the operational side of the house. At Broadcom, I use that real-world experience to work on long-term research projects that will impact how the industry deals with cyber defense in the 7 to 10-year time frame. I am co-chair of the CACAO Technical Committee and heavily involved in the STIX and TAXI work along with other international standards.
Hi everybody, my name's Alan Thompson. I'm also a CACAO co-chair with Brett. I'm the CTO of Looking Glass, and I would really like to appreciate everybody on this call. Everybody's time is valuable, and we look forward to sharing with you more details on what CACAO is. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Stephanie Hazelwood, and security orchestration is definitely a critical business need, which is why I have the job I do as lead architect of the SOAR technology and platform capabilities at IBM. We really take the adoption of open technologies and standards quite seriously because in general, we want to reduce the friction for our clients as they leverage their arsenal of security tools they already have at their fingertips today. So that's one of the main reasons I'm a member of this technical committee. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Andrew Storms and I am the VP of Security Research and Development team at New Context. I've been with the company for a little over 5 years, and during that time we've been engaging with various national labs through the Department of Energy, vendors and utilities, really working towards to build tools for supporting resiliency of electrical grids. One area of focus that we've been working on is security orchestration for the operational technology environments. We are a big proponent of interoperability, which is just one reason why I'm here today supporting CACAO. And with that, we're going to go to the next slide, please.
It seems like we hear daily how some organization has fallen victim to a new attack or campaign. Threat actors and intrusion sets are advancing at a significant rate relative to cyber defense. The overall number of attacks is going up and the attack surface is exploding. There is so much data that can be exploited and so much illegal money to be made that threat actors are doubling down and going all in. Next slide.
So I think, Brett's, really touched on a really important point, which is that, the attacks are getting more advanced, they're getting faster, and CACAO is really about how do our industry respond to that sophistication, our growing sophistication. And so CACAO is really trying to address defending organizations in a more effective manner. The fact that many organizations are doing a lot of manual things in terms of their responses, products that they are using may be siloed. They don't integrate that well together because they're potentially from different vendors. They're not designed with interoperability or orchestration in mind. So CACAO is really trying to address that aspect of starting to look at it much more holistically and trying to provide the organization with a way to respond to threats in a more holistic and collected way. Next slide, please.
CACAO offers significant benefits to organizations across the board. Andrew, in your view, what are some of the biggest benefits that you see?
Thanks for asking, Brett. Earlier when I introduced myself, I talked about our work doing research along with our partners in the Department of Energy. And when you talk about automating grid responses to cyber events, many of the OT operators out there that I've spoken to about this, they actually kind of do that begin to faint, and you have to catch them so they don't fall over. You have to consider that many of the grid operation responses out there today are very complex, And when you take those responses, they can have physical, real world impacts. And again, they're very complex and they have a lot of institutional knowledge that they're based upon. And all of that means it's very difficult today to script those responses with the tools that are out there. You know, I'm excited about CACAO. I think we have a real fighting chance here to build complex response playbooks that work across very diverse environments, whether that's IT or OT, and whether that's a different cyber response or physical response. I think CACAO is going to be able to help us there. And we could go to the next slide, please.
So one of the key things that CACAO is really trying to address is not just its intention to support organizational defense, it's also making security vendors who are building products or services to allow them to collaborate and to communicate in ways that currently are a much more ineffective way. So what we're really looking at is how do vendors also embrace the standard in their products and then communicate how those products can be part of an orchestration in an organization. I know that this is one of the key things that you know, myself representing Looking Glass, but also other companies such as IBM. I know, Stephanie, what are your thoughts on that?
Thanks, Alan. The benefit of a standard like CACAO, you know, and what it can provide to vendors like IBM and others is really clear from my point of view. So whether it's for us to be able to provide our SOAR clients with prepackaged playbooks that help them get up and running quickly with the automations that they need to respond, investigate, and stop things like phishing attacks, or whether it's just to provide guidance to our own engineering organizations as we better unite IT, security teams, and application developers and integrate security into their DevOps pipelines, you know, this notion of DevSecOps now. So being able to use a standard like CACAO can really help us establish these practices, automate what we can, and easily share that knowledge across engineering teams with similar missions. So it's absolutely very, very beneficial to vendors, in my point of view. Next slide, please.
The need and desire for these automated playbooks started as Alan and I looked to address a future growing need in cyber defense. That is the ability to respond quickly, efficiently, and with full auditability. Early on, Alan and I, we worked with several large organizations, vendors, governments, and big banks. Then at the start of 2018, we began working with Cisco and IBM to produce our first internet draft that we submitted through the IETF workstream. Over the next year and a half, we presented this idea at several international conferences and events like RSA and FIRST, just to name a few, NISA. Through this effort, we consistently heard that this work was needed and would be a game changer for cyber defense. Fast forward to 2019, Alan and I began working on forming a technical committee here at OASIS. Now we have over 70 individual members representing a broad constituency of industry partners. We have published a requirements document and have produced 2 drafts of the CACAO playbook specification, which we'll probably hear a little bit more about in the coming slides. Our hope is that we can have our first published version of CACAO by fall of this year, so we can start holding interoperability and plugfests and hackathons to ensure that vendors and incident responders are able to communicate and parse CACAO playbooks. Alan, what else do you want to add?
Yeah, I think what, you know, you've captured a lot of the background really well. I think one of the key things here is that we can't afford to take many years to develop a standard. This industry is moving quickly, the technologies are changing, and as well as our adversaries are figuring out how to apply attacks to our environments. And so as a standards in an industry organization, we really need to move quickly. And so we are pushing hard, making sure that we get as much input on both what we need to do in terms of the requirements, but also the specification needs to be developed quickly. So we're not really going to be talking in several years of, you know, first draft of the specification. And as Brett has highlighted here, you know, we're on a very fast work stream here. We want people to realize that this is not going to take a long time because we need it now. We need it to apply it to our products as well as the organizations that are going to be using those products. Next slide, please. So one of the things that, you know, we wanted to cover in this webinar was give you a little bit of a sample of what CACAO is in terms of the background that we just gave you, but also give you a couple of examples of how CACAO can be applied to organizational environments and highlight some of the key aspects of a CACAO playbook. So this this first example is a hypothetical example, but it's similar to many environments where you have a security operations team that receive an IDS signature alert. They don't have automatic blocking on, so it's really just an alert. And they are not necessarily that confident about that alert to mitigate or apply an immediate action. So in this particular scenario, they want to have the threat intel team go take that alert and any contextual information associated with the alert, go research it, and then come back with a report and a set of recommendations on what the security operations team should apply. And there's several options based on what the analysis team come back with. One is that it's just, ignore the alert, it's a false positive, and then just close the ticket in the SecOps system that they're using. Another potentially could be, well, the signature needs to be improved so that it reduces false positives, but it actually provides more accurate information. And then the third option is maybe that it is a valid alert that should be acted upon, and therefore the team needs to act immediately to quarantine and potentially remediate the systems that are involved in that alert. Next slide, please. So at a high level, you have the security operations team. They receive an alert. That system that's receiving that alert could be a SIM, could be numerous other products that receive alerts from an IDS. They may have an automated way to ticket or start a ticket. They may have a human being be able to create a ticket in the system. That information is then passed to the threat intel analysis queue. And then the threat intel have a playbook where they go through the set of information that they typically gather on an alert. So the example that you're seeing here is running things in parallel in the middle there, where they gather any active intelligence threats from either their tips or other intelligence sources that they may have. They may gather additional information about what networks, public networks or private networks are involved in the triage. They may also then gather passive DNS information about domain information if that's relevant. They may also then understand who is information associated with this alert. So the threat intel is really kind of building a much more comprehensive picture of what this alert represents. They then build that report. There may be some automated creation of the report. There may also be human ability to input their own context. That then is then reported back to the security operations team through their queue, and then the security operations team updates their alert ticket based on whatever recommendations are being provided and into the ticket database. So this may seem like a fairly simple sequence, but there's human beings involved and there's also machines involved. And what we're creating here is a playbook that orchestrates this entire sequence through the system. Next slide, please. So in terms of playbooks, we looked at what are the important aspects of information that needs to be conveyed in a playbook. There's several key things that everybody should be aware of. The first is that the metadata associated with the playbook, which we have a subsequent slide that will get into the details, but at a high level, it provides you the information about what this playbook is representing, what potentially threats it responds to, what does it orchestrate, etc. We then have the workflow where it describes how the playbook operates and the logic within that, and it then has a set of actions and targets that it invokes in terms of actions that are part of the playbook. And then the final aspect is really around something that Brett and I and Stephanie and Andrew as well, we've learned from other standards such as Sticks and Taxi, where marking of the data is really important. So the ability to mark it with as either a TLP level or copyright information. So if you're sharing playbooks in a marketplace, then potentially you want to mark things with the copyright information. The final aspect, which is really important from our perspective, is the ability to extend the standard without a lengthy standards process. So we've built in to the specification the ability for organizations and vendors to easily extend the standard for their specific needs so that they can use the framework of CACAO, but ultimately they can mold it into whatever they need for either a specific command and control protocol that they use for their equipment or specific capabilities that maybe are unique to their environment. Next slide. So one of the things I wanted to ask Stephanie before I go on to the meta details was really how important playbooks are in a sharing environment. And Stephanie, you know, I know IBM, and you mentioned earlier the marketplace that you've been involved in. What's your perspective on sharing?
Yes, it's something that comes up again and again, Alan, you're right. And so by having a standardized way to document and share playbooks, you know, we can have scenarios where we can have a parent playbook call out to a variety of child playbooks and create that reusable building block like steps of other automations that we can take advantage of. So this will really allow us to adopt automated responses more quickly and not be so restricted to the specific teams or technology implementations that carry out these different subtasks. So you know, the interoperability that the standard provides is there, and a number of managed security service providers take this approach, you know, with having a parent call out to a different child, like orchestrations, and I'll talk a little bit about that a bit later. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, for sure. So I know, Brett, you know, one of the things that we talked about with when we were creating the metadata was how important labeling and categorization of playbooks were for sharing and collaboration. You know, some of the key things that I'm highlighting on this slide around metadata are really important from an operational perspective, but I know, you know, you have particular thoughts on labeling.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Yeah, so many organizations and trust groups and tools use certain keywords or terms when classifying, grouping, or acting on playbooks or on the actions that are contained therein. This is especially true once these actions become automated or integrated with other tools in the workflow of the SOC. So we felt that when we were designing CACAO that we needed to provide support for these from the very beginning, because these will be used in auditing, they'll be used in logging, they'll be used as anchor points when you integrate with other products in the product portfolio, or when you're doing vendor to vendor, you know, cross technology integration. So we wanted to make sure some of these things were done from the very beginning.
Yeah. Next slide, please. So one of the things that playbooks have done is separate the workflow, the logic of the playbook from the actions. But we focused on things like common programming constructs like looping, sequential, parallel, conditional steps. And we learned from other orchestration tools out there, such as BPNN, where they separated the pattern of the logic from the actual actions. So we've use that similar pattern so that you can define the logic of the playbook independent of the actual actions. And next slide, please. So with the actions, this is where you say what specifically you want to invoke, and that could be an SSH command where you're logging in, running a remote shell. You could be doing an HTTP call, you could be an OpenC2 call, and you could be then applying that action to different targets, whether it's one target or a set of targets in an operational environment. The key thing here is that this action and that target are built and referred to from the workflow. And ultimately, as I mentioned earlier, the ability to have your own particular extensions for particular actions or protocols that are unique to your environment is a critical part of the thing that we've focused on. You know, I know that Andrew, you know, that was a particularly important thing for your OT environments.
Yeah, certainly OT, but also as we've talked about before in this new world of infrastructure as code and the DevSecOps world. You know, this concept of targets and actions really has drastically changed over the last number of years. And, you know, if you think about when, you know, I was a sysadmin in the early 90s and someone would just say, you know, apply the patch to the email server. Well, I mean, it was fairly easy and we kind of straightforward, we knew what to do. But, you know, these days with the massive explosion of infrastructure as code, we now talk about how a single action, something executed through CACAO, could have an impact on an entire ecosystem and everything connected to it. And I think CACAO is taking up all these concepts into account and it's really going to set us up for success when we start to use it more often. And so with that, we're going to go to Brett for one more example here.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. So in this next example, we'll look at a traditional response for a system that was infected with this mythical fuzzy Panda X malware variant. There's a few questions you always need to ask yourself when you're looking at things like this, especially in how they're done today. How many groups or systems and devices need to be touched during an incident? How long does this normally take? Usually in the concept of months. How many blog posts do you need to read to figure out all of the IOCs and potential cleanup steps? So let's look at a very specific example, and we'll kind of go through this pretty quickly. Next slide. So in this, in these next few slides, we're going to look at this very simple high-level playbook that could be used for a malware cleanup. When the incident starts, the SOC team will pick it up, and they'll do some things, and then they'll hand it off to the network team. Next slide. The network team and SOC will do their thing, and then eventually they'll pass it on to the desktop team to do their work. And you'll see that the desktop team has a lot of manual steps they need to follow. With CACAO, we hope that we're able to automate the vast majority of these and really speed things up and provide a lot better accountability and auditability. Next slide. When the desktop team is done, they'll hand it back to the network team. They'll verify that the machine is good, and then they'll put it back into service. Next slide. This diagram shows the overall complexity that exists from a simple malware infection that has moved laterally through the network. Anyone that's done operational security should be pretty familiar with this. One can see all of the groups and systems that are impacted. Machine parsable playbooks will enable organizations to respond more quickly, more completely, and have better audit tracking. In addition, over time, a lot of the simple tasks can be automated to greatly speed up the process of cleanup, mitigation, and ultimate remediation. Andrew, what does this look like in your operational technology side of the house?
Sure. Traditionally OT networks are fairly simple and flat from the networking perspective, but business environments have changed quite significantly. So the influx of IoT and industrial IoT and distributed energy resources have really resulted in the OT networks becoming much, much more complex over time. There's real world consequences at stake. I keep saying this, a change in cyber has a very physical OT outcome. So even a simple example like restarting services can, create this cascading string of unanticipated events or outcomes that can have real world output, like things catching fire and other things that we don't want to talk about that could happen. So really, CACAO is going to allow us to be careful about what we can orchestrate in that OT world.
Next slide. So we need to advance beyond just writing down course of action steps in a wiki or a knowledge base article. We need playbooks to not just be pretty pictures like what you see on this slide. We need to start developing shareable playbooks in JSON so they can be parsed by machines and used across technology stacks. Next slide.
So this is Andrew. Stephanie and I want to take just a few minutes to talk about and respond to kind of the MSP perspective. We've already seen two really great examples from Alan and Brett, and I like to talk about how the promises of CACAO really do allow us to be able to respond faster, helps support interoperability across many vendors situations, and collaborate within our own peer groups and industries. For years, I was that guy responsible for responding to the cyber events. I really could have used something like CACAO back in the way old days of the I Love You virus, where I had to start calling everybody on the phone to ask them what they're doing. It would be really great to have something like CACAO where we could share what we were doing through a machine readable format. Stephanie, comments on the MSP perspective?
Yes, so true. So true. I echo a lot of those thoughts you have, Andrew. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier in this talk, managed security services organizations have the task of setting everything up for each of their clients. And so playbooks can be involved and can, clearly sometimes be very complex. But the good news is that a number of those complexities are generic enough that they can be used across industries, leaving only sort of a set of recommended actions or steps for for their clients to incorporate as their secret sauce, so to speak. So having a standard for communicating these various playbooks back and forth, the content of those will really help expedite things. Being able to sync up what the MSB provides as a starting point with what the client adds here, and having that common understanding of what's happening is really going to speed things up here. And thinking forward a little bit with the appropriate permissions in place, we might also be able to see better how we can understand how those playbooks are evolving or how they're getting used, and typically getting modified, so even better recommendations or actions can be made by the MSP to their clients for additional steps to take. Next slide, please.
So CACAO is going to solve a lot of the issues that we've talked about today and more. It will allow playbooks to be shared across technology stacks, organizational groups, business units, and industry sectors. These playbooks will be shareable just like threat intelligence, and will be linkable to the intelligence graph. CACAO will turn wiki texts and diagrams into machine parsable actions. Stephanie, in closing, what are you most excited about?
Brett, I'm really excited that the industry is moving to adopt more open standards, just in general. There are so many point solutions out there today and so many efficiencies to be gained. I really believe that collaboration is the future for threat management and response orchestration, and that with this increasing attack surface, complexity of attacks, it's really driving the need for all of us in this community to share and make available what we know so that we can focus on the solutions to the really hard challenges ahead.
Thanks, Stephanie. Andrew, what about you? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I work in that field of cybersecurity because I love helping people manage their risk. I'm excited that CACAO and the other related standards that we've mentioned here today all play a crucial role in keeping the connected world safe. I'm looking forward to our future.
Thanks, Andrew. Alan, you and I have been at this for a long time now. What are your closing thoughts?
Well, the standard is really better because of the collaboration in the standards process itself. And so the more people get involved in helping create that standard that represents what they need, the better it's going to be for everybody. And so we encourage, Brett and I and Stephanie and Andrew, we're all involved in trying to help make this standard be meaningful to your specific needs, as well as our own, obviously. But the key thing here is that it's an open process. We encourage people to get involved. The URL that's on this slide shows you the working group that we have. If you have the time and the inclination, please sign up and help us make sure the standard represents what you need, whether it's just additional requirements or you have specific examples that you have tried to solve in your own world that you would like a standard to solve for you going forward. So please sign up. Next slide, please. Dee, I believe.
Terrific. You guys did great. Thank you so much. So we are pretty much right at the end of our half an hour, but I would like to ask one, we have lots of great questions. And again, as I said in the beginning, we will follow up individually with you. We will get these questions answered. We do not have time. I did want to ask one closing question though. If I wanted to implement CACAO today in my product, where would I start?
Well, I'll take that. As I mentioned, I think the place to start is really getting involved in the process. So currently, the TC is you have to be an OASIS member to be able to contribute to the standard. However, the OASIS once a standard has been approved, then it becomes public and available to implement. So if you have the inclination to sign up to OASIS and be part of the creation of the standard, then that's one route to go so that you can help form it and steer it to where you need it to go. If you would prefer to wait until the standard is more publicly available, then that's probably going to be the latter half of this year, where we hope to publish a public standard that can then be implemented. I know, for example, that Stephanie recently, I believe, had a plug fest where she was had people working with the draft standard to kind of put together examples of using it, and we got some really great feedback from that, from real world practical use of the standard. So the more of that type of thing going on early on, make sure that the standard actually represents what we need in products.
And I think I would add to that, Alan, that we've published a requirements document that you can download now and review, and look through that requirements document and see if all of your requirements are going to be met, because that is kind of what we're trying to build against. So that will give you an idea of the features and functionalities that CACAO will contain.
Agreed.
Terrific. I'd like to again thank our speakers and thank all of you for taking time out of your busy day. We will be following up with all of you. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.